Now from Archaeology News Northeast, the latest archaeology news and interviews from around the UK. This is Tales from the Trowel with Jackie and Sarah.
Welcome back, everybody, to Tales from the Trowel. I'm Sarah.
I'm Jackie.
Today we are joined by Mr. Gary Bankhead, author, underwater archaeologist, Freeman of Durham, Deputy Warden of the Cord Wainers Trading Company, and Honorary Research Associate from the Department of Archaeology at Durham University. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, that is a spectacular resume there.
It is, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. No, it's lovely. It's lovely to be here, and a pleasure to talk to you, ladies.
So, I suppose really we should start at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about your, how you got started in all of this?
Yes, so my name's Gary Bankhead, and people say, who's Gary Bankhead? But basically I'm a Durham lad. I was lived as a young man in Chesley Street, but moved to Durham, where I met my wife Angela, and today we live at Pitmatic.
Fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with the underwater escapades?
Yeah, I guess it started shortly after I joined the Fire and Rescue Service. So I don't really mention this. I served for 31 years with County Durham and Darlington Fire and Rescue Service. Only retired in March 2020, just as the pandemic hit. But shortly after I joined the fire service back in 1990, I became a sub-aqua diver. I was a member of a British sub-aqua club, got qualified, and with that diving club, dived extensively around UK inshore waters. Typically, we dive the shipwrecks off the Tyne or the Farne Islands, which is a really brilliant place to learn how to scuba dive. And then up the northwest coast of Scotland, so had a lot of experience. I qualified up to dive leader qualification, so I was able to teach people how to dive. I loved doing it. It was my passion. It was my hobby. But if you sort of fast forward or turn the clock back to 2007, I was with my wife Angela, and it was a Sunday morning. I remember it very clearly. It was early April, and Angela, we'd actually, on that particular day, we'd gone for a walk around Durham, as we would normally do on a Sunday, and then we paused for a cup of coffee, and Angela inquired when I was going to go scuba diving next, but she meant the North Sea, the Farne Islands. Yeah. But because it was April, it was too early in the season, so she suggested, quite innocently, I guess, for me to dive in the River Wear, and she pointed down to the water, and I remember it clearly. She said, "You're sure to find something old if you go in there." So I dismissed Angela's idea there and then, because the river was the same colour as the coffee we were drinking, so it looked quite grim. Yeah. But actually, a couple of weeks later, the conditions improved, and I thought, I'm going to give this a go. And I managed to convince my brother Trevor to join me on an exploratory dive, and that's what we did. So it was April 2007. I remember the day. It was very, very cold, and actually the water temperature was freezing, and we didn't enjoy the dive at all. But on that very first dive, Trevor spotted a trowel just lying there on the riverbed, and it turned out to be quite a special trowel. It was silver, it was inscribed, and it had the words Lord Archbishop of Canterbury on, which was
goodness me,
crazy thing. Yes, it was essentially it was a trowel used to lay the foundation stone of St Michael's Church in Durham, and it was laid by His Grace Lord Archbishop of Canterbury, and it was provided to the diocese by the Bengal Coal Company Limited.
Wow!
And dated 1961. So what an incredible object to find, and that was it. That one discovery changed my life forever.
That's incredible.
It is. Just like kind of why don't you have a dip in the river? And it's like, wow, that's absolutely amazing.
It surely was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very long story, but that subsequently led to many, many other discoveries of gold and silver. This huge hoard of basically ecclesiastical treasure that was associated with a former Archbishop of Canterbury, but a man who had this long association with Durham City. He was a former canon and Bishop of Durham. He was a Bishop of York, and the gentleman was called Arthur Michael Ramsay. He was the 100th Archbishop of Canterbury, and the discovery of those objects led to a licensed agreement being signed between ourselves and Durham Cathedral, and we went on to find so many objects underneath Prebends Bridge, which is where we found them all. That led to essentially discovering many other things that actually were older.
Yeah.
And apparently that's archaeology.
Yeah.
So in the river, what sort of time periods are we looking at? Are the finds that you've been lifting out?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. The river itself it's been there for millennia. It's the very reason Durham City is what it is, the way it shapes that peninsula. But I guess it's the bridges themselves. So the first bridge that we investigated underneath was Prebends Bridge, but that's only just over 200 years old. So objects that we find there, you would typically expect to date from that period. And in fact, the oldest object I think I can recall is a Dutch East India Company 1 Doubt coin, which is dated 1793.
Wow.
Everything, there was hundreds of Queen Victoria period bunhead pennies, thousands of coins actually. So the coins essentially date from the time the bridge was built, and you date, if you can find coins, that's really helpful because it helps date everything. But Durham's two other bridges, Elvet and Framlegate, are both over 800 years old. So you can imagine things are that old under the bridge, and that turns out to be the case. So in Durham City, our stunning World Heritage Site, we have essentially 3 old bridges, but it's Elvet where I've been focused on most of my time, and the objects that I find there date from the time after the bridge was built. So from the 12th century onwards, only 2 objects that I found predate the bridge, and one of those was a Roman depondius. So Roman coins in the river are really rare, certainly for Durham, should I say. And the other object was an Anglo-Norman buckle, which is quite. So so the objects in Durham aren't necessarily old. Only 12th century, but elsewhere in the River Wear, which I have been working with other community archaeology groups, the objects are significantly older. For example, at Hilton in Sunderland, we've discovered 5 Bronze Age anchors, which are in themselves are an incredible discovery. I'm really excited about that, and that's just opened up a whole new can of worms. That one, yeah.
A whole new era.
Yes.
So how did you come to get into the academic side of archaeology? Obviously going from the fire brigade and obviously scuba diving as a hobby, and then how did that transition happen?
Yeah, it was definitely accidental. So from day one, everything that we found at Prebends Bridge, we gave to Durham Cathedral. Their resident archaeologist, a lovely gentleman, Norman Emery, he worked with us to meticulously record the objects that we found. So having worked initially with the resident archaeologist of Durham Cathedral and then the finds liaison officer, back in 2009, 2010, I had an opportunity to take some of the objects that I'd found down to the Department of Archaeology, and on that particular visit, I met a gentleman called Dr. Chris Capel. He's a senior lecturer, a world-renowned expert in the conservation of typically metal objects. And Chris, I showed Chris the objects that I'd found. He recognised the importance of them straight away. And basically we struck up a deal. So I would loan the Department of Archaeology the small finds that I'd found in the river, and their MA students would research them as part of their coursework. So individually, they were each given one object, and they had to produce a 3,000-word research report, using all of the analytical equipment at their disposal. So that is something that actually continues to this day. So we have this huge pile of research reports, which is really important. So if you fast forward to sort of 2012, Chris recognised that I was becoming sort of knowledgeable in these small finds. I was certainly researching them as much as I could. And he said, Gary, as a mature person, why don't you come back into higher education, get a degree in archaeology, and then that we'll try to get you onto the MA program, and then you yourself can help research these objects. So I took Chris up on his offer, and as a mature student, I re-entered higher education and embarked on this lifelong learning concept and just learned everything I possibly could about archaeology. I remember being at Binchester doing my field work and thoroughly enjoying it, met some wonderful people, and really got hooked from there, and I've never looked back, I guess.
Oh,
So I take it your dissertation would have been on your finds from the river, was it?
Yeah, so I did the undergrad bit, which it was fascinating. It was hard work because I was doing it on my shifts, on my days off. I was getting people to cover for me for particular lectures, and then I had to pay them back. So it really was challenging in terms of just commanded all of your free time. But I had that opportunity working as a firefighter, so I could do this on my days off. And it came at great expense, of course. As a mature student, I didn't qualify for a student loan.
Yeah.
I'd already had one a few years earlier. You don't get a second one, apparently. And it coincided with tuition fees dropping up to £9,000 a year. So
Yeah.
it was tough. But I would do it again in a heartbeat. You know, it was definitely well worthwhile. So I did the undergrad bit. That got me onto the MA program, and thoroughly enjoyed that. I really did. The analysis, the reading of objects is something that was just absolutely fascinating, and I embraced it. My research report that I did for the MA was on a pectoral cross. It was a small pewter cross that I'd found. Turns out it's incredibly rare, quite important object. It's a small pewter pectoral cross with equal length flaring arms, but the decoration is representative of Anglo-Saxon golden cloisonné cell work, and the form of this particular cross is incredibly similar to St Cuthbert's 7th century Anglo-Saxon cross. And it turns out that this particular object is late medieval in date, but it's a pilgrim souvenir from the time of pilgrimage to the shrine of St Cuthbert of Durham. It's incredibly rare. It is the only material culture evidence ever found associated with pilgrimage to the shrine of Cuthbert. It's so rare, in fact, that the British Museum want it for their own exhibition. They have pilgrim souvenirs from every other English shrine, but not Cuthbert of Durham.
Not from
so
Durham.
I'm trying to fend them off and say,
Yeah.
you can't have it.
It's hours.
So I thoroughly enjoyed the MA, and when I did my final research report, it was on lead cloth seals, these very small enigmatic objects, which at that time I think I had about 240 of them, and they're actually really, really important objects. They are all associated with textile manufacture, taxation and trade, and they constitute the largest collection of such objects available for analysis outside of London. So you can just imagine how important they are, not just a regional level, but also a national level.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about what one of these cloth seals looks like?
Yeah. So these are small little lead discs. If you imagine a piece of flat lead about the shape and size of a modern 10p piece, but there'll be two of these connected together by a thin strip of lead. One disc would have a hole in, and the other disc would have a sort of a little rivet device. And very simply, they would be attached to cloth. They would slide one disc underneath a bolt of cloth, then just fold the soft lead over, align the rivet with the hole, and use a pair of sealing tongs or a hammer and a die, and essentially squash it together, and you affixed it to the cloth, to the edge of the cloth. And that sealing action imparted a privy mark or a ligature or a royal device, evidence that the cloth had been inspected and it conformed to the crown statute, but also that a taxation and subsidy had been paid. So typically it was 4p per broadcloth. So the officials who undertook this action, this duty, were known as alnagers. So in England, from the time of Edward III, a weaver wasn't allowed to sell his cloth unless it had been inspected first. So the crown appointed official having said that, in Durham, it was the bishop appointed official would come into your place of work. He would inspect the cloth, affix his little lead seal, put his little mark on it to say, yes, it has been inspected, it does conform to the Crown statute, he has paid the tax, and that weaver can now sell the cloth.
So it's like a quality control as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a bit of that. Later statute required that dyers and fullers also affix their seals to the cloth. And just jumping back to the work of the trade and craft guilds, the drapers and tailors companies of Durham would appoint searchers and wardens, and these were sort of official men, experienced men, who would inspect the workmanship of their fellow weavers and tailors or drapers, just to ensure that the standard of the cloth was really high, and they would affix their searchers' seals on, so they would search.
Ah, right, okay.
So there's a wide range of different cloth seals, but essentially they were, first of all, evidence that a tax had been paid, they conformed to the statute, and then latest cloth seals would confirm that the standards were really high, and basically just you could trace it back to the man who did that finishing work on that textile.
So these are some of the things that you've been bringing out of the river. So some of these cloth seals, are they all just from Durham?
That's a really good question, yeah. Ultimately, I did my thesis on the lead cloth seals. One of the greatest revelations, I guess, is that the cloth seals themselves come from all over Europe. These weren't just attached to cloth woven in Durham or dyed in Durham. Some wonderful patterns have emerged. We've got a batch of textiles from the West Riding region of essentially North Yorkshire, and they would have been affixed to the later worsted cloth that was produced during the Industrial Revolution. So we had steam-powered mills, mass-produced textiles. Nobody could compete. It was the cheapest textile that was being manufactured, and they essentially cornered the world market. But we've got cloth seals from further afield, from the West Country, from Devizes, and from Devon and Wiltshire. They would have been fixed to broadcloths and kerseys during the late medieval period. We have many cloth seals from Norfolk. They would have been attached to worsted cloth in the 17th century, and that's really fascinating. We have dozens of cloth seals from London, and typically they were dyed blue on the banks of the River Thames by members of the London Dyers Company operating out of Riverside Workshop. So they're fascinating objects. But across the channel in the Netherlands, we have cloth seals that were once attached to linen cloth, and they were linen was woven in Leiden and Haarlem, and that linen was far superior to what was available locally here in Durham. So you would typically cost 5 to 10 times dearer than what was locally supplied. So the linen cloth was this luxurious, expensive linen from the Flanders and Brabant region of Northern Europe. So modern day France and Belgium, we have these really important and luxury woolen cloths being produced in centres such as Lille and Tournai, Rouen even, and that was produced during the 14th and 15th century. So those are some of the earliest cloth seals ever found in the UK.
So do you think some of this fabric was being used to make garments for the clergy, the more expensive fabrics?
Yeah, that's you've nailed it there. I guess the subsequent research has revealed that the bursar at the monastery of Durham would dispatch merchants out of either Hartlepool or Newcastle on vessels loaded with cargo. They would sail down the northeast coast and sell their cargo in London, but the merchant would be given basically a shopping list. He would be tasked with going into the cloth hall in London and procuring really expensive, luxurious woolen cloth for the monastery's livery, for the clothes that the clergy were wearing at the time, and other exuberances. The bursar's accounts survive in abundance for Durham, and you can readily go through these and easily identify the procurements of cloth that are recorded. But the really expensive cloth, all it ever says is Apud London, so from London. We now know that actually this was coming from Flanders and the Brabant region.
Right. Yeah. So can you tell us how do these seals then end up in the river?
Really good question. Lots of good questions today. So It's just a theory, but we think that the River Wear beneath Elvet Bridge today is much deeper than it used to be. So it's artificially deep. It's about 7 foot deep, and I think that's because of the mill. So the South Street mill and the weir that's down there is artificially increased the depth, a bit like a plug in a bath. But just 200 years ago, the River Wear at Elvet was much shallower, so probably was about knee or thigh deep. So people could wade into the water. And we know by looking at the archives and special collections of Durham that who the people were who actually lived or resided in the tenements in the new borough of Elvet. And what I've identified is that multiple dyers were based down there. So if you were a dyer, you needed access to river water. Dyers were very clever men. They knew the certain metals and irons that were in the water. So in order for a dyer to dye cloth in a big vat, he needed copious quantities of water. So if you could set up your dyeing business adjacent to the river, that was an ideal location to do that. So they would boil their big vats of dye stuff up. They would then put the cloth in to be dyed. But that cloth, after it stood for half a day, had to be rinsed. So you had to rinse off the excess dye. So they would use carts and even oxen to pull these heavy bolts of cloth. You can just imagine how heavy wet cloth is. And they would unfurl them into the river. They would wade in, and it was just simply let the current take the bolt of cloth downstream, and then they would use their arms and their strength and just like vigorously rinse them. And it was that vigorous rinsing action that meant that these flimsily attached cloth sails simply fell off.
Right.
And there you go, 200, 300, 400 years later, Gary Bankhead comes along.
He finds them.
He finds them, yeah.
I mean, did anybody... This obviously the significance of the cloth seals, because it's not only, that the cloth was being treated on the banks of the river, but then obviously you found out actually this isn't just Durham cloth. This is movement of people. This is trade. This is much bigger than just somebody dyeing cloth on the side of the river. I mean, that must have been fantastic for you in your research to realise actually this hasn't really been investigated much, particularly in Durham. Yeah. I mean, that must have been fantastic.
It really was, and I'm very fortunate in that I've been given the opportunity to work and continue the research in the Department of Archaeology. As part of my thesis, I had an opportunity to travel to Glasgow, where I undertook some ultra-high performance liquid chromatography analysis. So basically what that means is that trapped within many of the cloth sails that I found is surviving textile.
I was going to ask about that, if any of the textile actually survived.
It does, yes, in abundance, and it's but to open a cloth sail to take out these tiny scraps of cloth is sort of damaging the artifacts, and you've got to balance whether or not it's worth doing that. But actually, if you do that in a controlled way, the information you can glean far outweighs the damage that you do to the cloth sail. In fact, we were able to relatively easily open the cloth sails, the soft lead, and we did it in a controlled way, so we didn't damage the seal itself, and we were able to successfully extract the cloth. And when you analyse a cloth through using not just scanning, stereo microscopy, you can see the individual wool fibres, you can see the twill, the type of cloth, whether it's a twill weave or whatever weave it is. You can count the threads, so you can work out the fineness of the cloth. You can work out the Z and the S layer, which way it was twisted, the warp and the weft threads. So there's so much information. So we can essentially say, actually, that was this type of cloth, which is wonderful. Then you suddenly know what the people of Durham were wearing. But we went one further than that, and as I just mentioned, I went to Glasgow and undertook the ultra-high performance liquid chromatography. So for the first time ever in the United Kingdom, we successfully extracted colourants that were related to specific dye stuffs. So we were able to tell exactly what colour the cloth was.
That's incredible. Yeah, that really is incredible. Yeah.
So the culmination of all of that research is that we were able to identify that the colours of the cloth, the mordants that were being used to affix the dye to the cloth, the types of cloth, and we could then shed light on the colour of the clothes that people were wearing in Durham. And it turns out that Durham city wasn't this isolated bastion far off in the north, defender against the Scots. Whatever the fashion was in anywhere in Europe, for example, Paris or in Amsterdam or in London, whatever the type of cloth and the quality of that cloth, we could get exactly the same quality up here in the northeast. So it would come up in the port of Newcastle or Hartlepool, across inland to Durham. So we were very fashionable. We probably just took a few weeks later to set a trend off, and now over this. Yeah.
So what were the trendy colours back in the day? What have you found there?
The woad and madder were the two most popular dyes used up until sort of the 16th century. But with the discovery of the Americas, you suddenly had many more exotic colours coming in. So you had essentially the reds and the purples, the deep blues, the indigos. You had a wide range, and it was. But those colours, should I say, were really expensive, 20, 30 times dearer than your greens and your blues.
Yeah.
But no, they were here. So and probably was the clergy initially who were using those.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you started mentioning the purples, that immediately made me think about the clergy and Durham Cathedral, and I presume this is why Durham University takes the purple colours as well. It's a sign of quality.
Yeah.
You're right. And the second those trade routes were opened up to the east, to the West Indies, in Central America, you had hardwoods were coming over, logwoods. You can dye clothes red very, very easily, or various shades of red. Yeah.
You're underwater. I'm assuming it's pretty dark. What do you use? How do you find things? Is it just a case of you're literally on your hands? You're just going on touch, or do you have any more savvy equipment that kind of gives you a hand? Has there been anything over the last few years that's kind of aided that in discovery?
Yeah, the kit that I generally use when I'm scuba diving in the River Wear in Durham is exactly the same as I would use on a deep shipwreck off the Tyne. I do need an element of protection, so I wear a dry suit, which should keep you dry. doesn't always work. But you need to keep warm. Even during the summer months, it can get cool because you're almost stationary on the riverbed for nearly 2 hours, and tens of millions of litres of water pass over you, wick away your body heat. But generally, I'll wear a dry suit, a 15-litre cylinder, so I've got quite a long time. The fact that I'm only 6 to 7 feet under the water is pretty good, because it's probably the safest diving I've ever done. You don't get nitrogen narcosis or the bends. If I ran out of air, I'd probably just stand up. Yeah. I've been much worse scrapes in the North Sea, believe me. And so a thing that not many people know is that I'm not allowed to use a metal detector in the River Wear at Elbert. Actually, I don't need to, because the object, I know how to find them. I can see them. Because the bridge itself is a scheduled ancient monument, the law says you're not allowed to use a metal detector within 200 metres. So I've never used one, so that's fine. But in terms of visibility, I'm very fortunate, I guess, that actually for about 8 months of the year, it's really, really good. If you think about it, I only need to be able to see as far as I can reach down. I only need to be able to see my hands, I guess. But on many, many occasions, I can see 3, 4, 5 metres. The fact that it's shallow means that the sunlight just cascades through the water and illuminates the riverbed. So I don't even need a torch. So now that I'm slightly longer in the tooth, a bit more experienced, I typically only dive late spring, throughout the summer and early autumn. I don't need to dive in the winter. I'm too old, too sensible because it can get incredible. So the kit I use is essentially what any scuba diver would use diving anywhere around the UK and shore waters. The latest advancements I've had in recent years is to use a full face mask, and I don't know if you imagine, apart from it, normally I would have just used a pair of goggles, scuba diving goggles, but this full face mask sort of covers my whole head, and for me that's much better because it means I'm not having something a demand valve in my mouth, and I'm drawing air straight from that, but which means exposes my lips and mouth to the water.
Yeah.
We've all heard the stories of the sewage outfalls, and Durham's no different. Just upstream, maybe a mile upstream, there's a sewage outfall that seems to be continually pumping dirty water into the river. And even though it gets diluted by the time it gets to me, it's still there. So I don't really want the hazards of the biological hazards. I don't want to go home with a bad tummy.
Yeah.
So my full face mask protects me from that, the germs that's in the water, I guess. But it also allows me to insert a microphone. And for the first time, just last year, I was able to sort of record. So I've got cameras underwater now, and I'm capturing all of the discoveries. But I'm actually, when we're picking up on the mic, we can hear the excitement as I'm finding it. So even though I find hundreds of things, I still get excited with every one. And I'm punching the air underwater, like, yes, oh, wow, look at that. And I get so excited, even today. And so now the viewer, when we eventually get this footage out, can share in my excitement as the discoveries are being made.
Excellent. That's fantastic.
So all of these things that you find, obviously they're quite safe under the water, nothing's happening, nothing's changing with them really, and then you lift them out of the water and they hit the air. What's the next steps?
Very fortunate. I guess I live on the edge of a stunning World Heritage Site that just happens to have a castle and a cathedral and this incredible history. It has the river and the bridges, but it also has a world-class university on its doorstep. My connections with the Department of Archaeology allow me to access the conservation labs, and that's critical. I can't believe how lucky I am. Having said that, the vast majority of the objects that I've recovered are dress accessories. So 2/3 of everything I found are dress accessories. Can't say that. Dress accessories, basically buttons and buckles, brooches, rings, objects that people would have worn. It's an everyday material culture, I guess. And the vast majority are copper alloy or pewter. So they're quite stable base metals that need very, very little conservation. But on occasions we do find things that need conserving. So, for example, wooden objects, textile, leather shoes, bones. I found a wild boar's tusk even. Crazy little things that actually, when you think about it, do need to be conserved properly. I'm very fortunate I can just go up to the Department of Archaeology, ask nicely, and a conservator will take it on as part of their work. So it'll be a piece of work, research for them as well. They can help clean it up, remove some of the concretion around it. Ironwork is particularly troublesome. As you can imagine, iron and water never go well together. Some of the buckles that I found, some of the earliest buckles are 12th and 13th century, and typically they're about the size of your thumbnail, annular circular buckles, but they've all got an iron pin in there. And so the second you expose iron to air, that's when the corrosion starts.
Right.
So you have to be very quick in first of all drying them out, cleaning them as much as you can, but it's an incredibly delicate process, but then stabilising the ironwork. And the only way to do that is actually get them up into the lab and get them stabilised that way.
So do you have a team up there at the university who take on this work?
I wouldn't say I've got a team as such. I've continually worked with the MA students. The cohorts every year seem to get larger and larger. So I have this 20, 30, 40 students a year going through the system, and they're individually given an object. But there's another branch to it. There's a whole group of conservators up there. In fact, they've got staff who are conservation experts. It's just very, very case of just going up and saying, look guys, this one's quite unstable. What do I need to do? How can we best preserve this one? A really good example is a leather shoe that I found. It was 600 years old. It was beautifully preserved, had the sole, the leather, even had the laces where the knot was still in there, had a big hole in the bottom, and I think that's why it was thrown away. But that was it was a conservator, Vicky Garlick, who was a member of staff there, and Vicky was brilliant. She was instrumental in stabilising that, but it's a process that took many, many weeks. Different various solutions were added to the to the leather. Essentially, it meant that all of the fluid that was in there, the water that was trapped or absorbed into the leather, was replaced by this sort of stable chemical that essentially stopped the leather work from rotting. And today we have this wonderfully preserved leather shoe.
So that leads me on to my next question, which is what happens, what's the next process then once something's been stabilised and been conserved? What happens next?
Yeah, well, one of the first things that happen is that the objects themselves are recorded. So we need to capture that data. We need to know exactly whereabouts in the riverbed they were found, because we need to plot these all out and what depths that they were found. That in itself is a time-consuming process, as you can imagine. And then they are cleaned, dried, where necessary, conserved. Then they are all bagged. That again is this torturous process, necessary, and then allocated into a box with other similar type objects. So basically, they just are bagged and tagged.
So the things that have come out of the river, once they've been bagged and tagged, what happens to them after that?
Yeah. So the entire assemblage, I don't think we've mentioned yet how many objects there are.
Right, yes, I suppose, yeah.
But I have recovered 13,500 of these small finds. So
wow, that's a lot, a lot of recording.
It really is. It is probably the largest collection of late and post-medieval finds in the northeast of England. So it's a unique regional, indeed national resource. Really important. So much so that we need to do more than just bag and tag them. So it's my vision that we produce a whole series of monographs where we essentially research them and write them up and publish and tell their story. But let's go beyond that. Let's get them on display in our museums. So I'm very fortunate that I work very closely with Gemma Lewis, who's a curator at the Museum of Archaeology in Durham, and over the years we have put on a number of exhibitions, and for me that's so important. Getting these objects on display, because they really have captured the imagination of the citizens of the northeast. You know, this is very much their collection. It's their ancestors' objects that I found. So, and they really, really want to see them. I have had a few exhibitions at Bishop Auckland Castle over the years. That's really wonderful to have that. But the vast majority of objects end up on display in either a semi-permanent exhibition. Actually, just last year, so in 2023, in February and March, I was able to co-curate my very first exhibition with Gemma, and we had a wonderful little exhibition in the Museum of Archaeology, and it ran for about 7 weeks, and we had over 10,000 visitors to that exhibition. So you can just see the level of interest.
I visited that exhibition and was kind of blown away by the variety, and not only the number but the variety and the type. You know, the say a buckle, but the different types of buckles. There was a lot. There was definitely a lot to have a look at. It was an interesting exhibition.
Yeah, it really was. There is an online exhibition currently on run for the next 3 or 4 years, I imagine. That was done by students during the period of the pandemic where they couldn't interact, so they did a wonderful online one, and that's Stories of the Riverway, and that's very worth checking out, that particular one. I do know that the Museum of Archaeology have had some problem with a hole in the roof, and they had to close one of the main galleries, but I'm very excited for the next year where the museum reopens its major galleries, and we have a significant number of our objects on display. For me, that's what makes it
that's
brilliant.
kind of, you know, you've found it kind of like the end of the line. It's the story told all the way through, isn't it? It's like, this is your hard work, this is your research with obviously your students, and then it's presented to the people of the northeast. Like, here is your heritage. This is it. I mean, that must be a fantastic feeling when you see your work there presented to the public. I mean, that must feel great.
Yeah, it really does. For me personally, it's something I never ever dreamed of, but I guess from an earliest time, I've always realised I had to do the right thing, had to record these properly, had to work with the right people. For example, the Portable Antiquity Scheme, but in the Department of Archaeology and then the museums, let's get these objects published, tell their story. But actually, the people of Durham, people in the northeast want to see them. Let's get them on not just television, but also get them on display in our local museums.
So this leads me on to my next question, which is, how did the book come about?
The book came about sort of out of the blue. There's not many theses that go on to get published, and I was very fortunate that mine was. The Durham City Freemen actually recognised the sort of the links, the historical links between their own craft and trade companies. So the work of the dyers, the weavers company, the drapers and the tailors, the fullers. This is essentially what Durham City Freemen were all about. So they recognised that these objects were a direct, tangible link to their ancestors, their colleagues who were working 200, 300, 400 years ago in Durham. So they funded the publication of the book. I've been a member of the Arch committee for over 10 years now. The Arch being the Architectural and Archaeological Society of Durham.
That's a bit of a mouthful.
I'm pleased you said it.
That's what we call them, the Arch.
Yeah,
I've done their website for over 10 years, and they do have a series of monographs that they publish. And I approached the Arch and said, would you consider, if I upgraded my thesis into a book, publishing it as an Arch monograph? And very fortunately said yes. The publication costs were covered by the Durham City Freemen, so that was a wonderful gesture. Any profits or any monies generated actually go back into the publication of the next monograph, so that's very much a win-win. Very excited, very overwhelmed, to be honest, for the gesture from the Freemen. Absolutely amazing. And that culminated in the publication in 2022 of my very first book, the Textile Manufacture, Taxation and Trade in Late and Post-Medieval Durham City. I know it's a mouthful.
It is.
But it has to be.
Yeah.
Because that's what you get.
So if somebody wanted to get their hands on this book, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, first of all, they've got to be quick, actually. There's not too many first edition hardbacks left. The Dive into Durham website, there's a page dedicated to the book. diveintodurham.uk/publications. Basically, it's only available online, but if anybody emails me, I'm always able to sort of point them in the right direction.
Fantastic. And we can put your email contact details. If people get in touch with us, we can pass those on. Yeah,
of course.
So what's next for Gary Bankhead this year? I mean, you've had we all were watching you on the TV on Digging for Britain, which was fantastic, obviously showcasing Durham and the work that you do. What have you got coming up? What's next for you?
I've got an incredible year ahead, really exciting. Doing my thing at Elvet is coming to an end. I guess I've got enough objects.
Yeah.
Seem to have enough. The focus for me personally has to be on securing the funding to further the research, to produce the illustrations, to photograph these objects, to work with many future students and other specialists to start producing the monographs and the books, and let's get this work published.
Yeah.
Let's get them on display. That's brilliant. But actually, I can't really justify going back in the river at Elvet to recover more finds when I think I've got enough. But I am being pulled all over the place. So it's a bit of a sort of a secret for now, but I've been working with a local community archaeology group based at Hilton in Sunderland. So we've been investigating the River Wear further downstream, and we made some absolutely incredible discoveries down there. I can say that we've discovered 5 Bronze Age stone anchors, which constitute the largest collection of anchors found in a riverine environment ever in Europe. So that's
spectacular,
incredible.
yeah.
And this other massive structure that we've discovered, so I can't give any spoilers, but just watch the space for that one. I'm in the advanced stages of discussion working with Bishop Auckland Castle to investigate the River Wear at Binchester, the site of the crossing point for the Roman road.
Yeah.
It's never been investigated before, so I'm very excited by that. There's a potential that this year we may do a survey of the riverbed, and it'd be lovely to invite you girls along to.
That would be exciting. That would be fantastic.
Yes, it really would. Yeah.
See how that unfurls. So that's really exciting. I can't wait for that. I'm working with Shincliffe Local History Society, of all things, investigating the site of an ancient bridge that was originally discovered by the Piers Bridge divers, Rob and Ralph. They, about 30 years ago, they were investigating this site looking for a potential Roman crossing, and they found this significant timber structure underwater. I myself went there about 10 years ago and I saw it, and then discussions and investigations and other interested groups reached out to me, and basically Shincliffe Local History Society asked me if I'd go and help investigate, try to work out how old this structure was, and done a lot of filming there last year. We found it, it's still there. Sadly, it's actually eroding very quickly, and we'll probably lose this structure in a few years, maybe 10, 15 years it'll be gone. But in the meantime, we're going to do some dendrodating and trying to ascertain exactly how old it is. So that's a project that's ongoing. We did a lot of filming last year, and hopefully we get the funding from the Arch this year to investigate that. So that's the River Weir is really keeping me busy.
I was just going to say, it's keeping you very, very busy.
I think just TV work. I've got a really busy schedule coming up. We're just waiting to get the green light from Sky History to film another season of River Hunters, which I absolutely love being involved with. The fact that I work with a wonderful team, we have so much fun. If anybody's seen an episode, you just sense that we just get along so well. The banter between us is just incredible. It's non-stop. But actually, we make some amazing discoveries. We really do.
Yeah.
And we always surprise ourselves by what we find. So doing that is really great fun, and I'm pretty sure we'll be doing much more of that in the years to come. I have been asked to do my own spin-off series from that, so that's another thing I'm really excited by.
Yes.
So it'll be Gary Bankhead, lead presenter for that one.
Oh, incredible.
All fingers crossed for that one. That's fantastic.
And a whole series of other projects, smaller, I'd say lesser projects for YouTube. Having said that, YouTube is becoming massive now. All of the major networks have their own YouTube channel, and we're being approached by a couple to produce some shorts, some shorter versions going out about the UK, filming historical structures that are adjacent to British waterways, and telling their story. So that'd be really good. We were just down Barnard Castle last week, just doing just that.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
If there's obviously you've investigated so many fantastic places, but is the one left kind of on the list where you thought one day? That's
one day. Yes, and it is the River Stour in Canterbury.
Wow.
We actually filmed an episode of River Hunters down there a few years ago, and it's just I'd never been to Canterbury before. Beautiful medieval city, and the river there is crystal clear. It's a sort of chalk stream, absolutely beautiful conditions. It's a long story, but I've been approached by representatives from various organisations in Canterbury and asked if I will investigate the site of the Thomas at Becket shrine might have been thrown into the river. So, to cut a very long story short, Henry VIII sent his henchmen to Canterbury Cathedral, where Thomas Becket shrine was. The shrine itself was this incredible structure of almost like a red granite. They took sledgehammers to it, absolutely shattered it to bits, and all of the massive pieces of this shrine were thrown in the Stour and lost to history, so nobody ever knew whatever happened. Some bits have been recovered, I think in the 1980s, but that site where they were thrown in the river is known to a select few, and those few have approached me with a view to going down there. So I'm incredibly excited by that. They're trying to get the funding for that to happen, but we're going to film it all, as you can imagine we would do. And what an incredible story.
Yeah.
So if there's one place I really want to be in 2024 is the River Stour in Canterbury.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So part of this podcast that we do is to ask our guests about volunteers and about volunteer opportunities. If somebody was keen to get involved with anything that you do, anywhere along the line, is there some sort of amateur volunteer experience somebody could participate in?
That's tricky because we've got the objects. One thing I've never said actually is that the entire assemblage, everything that I found is being handed over. I've gifted them to the citizens of Durham. So basically what that means is I've given them to the Museum of Archaeology. So they once belonged to me, now they don't. So Gemma Lewis and her team are methodically going through these objects now. And there's a wonderful opportunity actually for volunteers to get involved in that. I think they're based up in Spennymoor, where the depot is. They're going through the boxes of these objects, and they're reboxing them into different typologies, and they're photographing them, and they're essentially recording them in a way that they can be uploaded to their website and accessible to everybody. So they'll be prefixed with a museum sort of a session number. So there's a wonderful opportunity to get involved with the work that Gemma and her team are doing on a volunteer basis. And I know they've got volunteers in there now that's doing it. It would be difficult for a volunteer to assist me because
it's kind of niche.
So if so you'll give us those details and we can pass them on to someone who's interested to get in touch with Gemma.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Great. That would be fantastic.
What if anybody was actually interested in specialise in a particular field of archaeology, and my artefacts feature in their field of interest, they're more than welcome to come along and look at those objects and start researching them. We would welcome that as well.
Oh, fantastic. So if there's a student who's looking at something like that, they can come along.
Yeah, not just a student. It could be a local history society, a group of people who might be fascinated in pilgrim souvenirs, for example, or buttons or buckles. Something that's specifically interested to them. Come and have a look. Come and request to see them. We've got a brand new study area set aside so they can actually physically see these objects, photograph them, do what they need to do, and write them up. Tell their story.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. I think there are a lot of groups and just a lot of people who would listen who don't realise you can actually go and have a look. You can actually just ask and it's fine. Do you know what I mean? These are accessible for everybody. You don't have to kind of be like behind a dusty shelf and have been there for 20 years in order to get a glimpse. You can actually just go and ask. And
so someone could get in touch with you via the Dive into Durham page and the contact us form there.
Yeah, it is that. Yeah. I should mention that I've done a whole series of talks on the work that I've done in the river, WIs, Rotary clubs, history groups. So the interest is phenomenal, and I always say to them, if you want a behind the scenes tour, just let us know and we'll facilitate that so you can actually go up to the Museum of Archaeology, get to see the archives. We'll do handle and collection so you can get to see them. So these things aren't locked away in Fort Knox. It's just a museum. It's open to everybody.
Yeah, people can really go inside and have a look.
Of course.
That's fantastic.
So my last question, I think, from me would be about career advice. If someone was interested in getting into something like this themselves.
Archaeology is generally open to everybody. Even if you had a disability, you still get involved in archaeology. To do underwater archaeology is a different kettle of fish. It's a different ball game entirely. It's physically very challenging. It does come at some expense as well. The kit that you use is very expensive, so it does restrict a lot of people. But if you got the permissions to access a particular site and you're trained to do it, go for it. I would recommend what I've done to anybody. Anybody can do it, but you just need to be brave enough to go underwater. It's a chicken and egg thing. I've been asked this before. Would you recommend for an archaeologist to go and search under rivers? I guess I did it the right way around. So I was a scuba diver first, very experienced. I've dived deep shipwrecks. I'm incredibly comfortable with scuba diving. Scuba diving for me in the river is the easiest form of diving I've ever done, but I know how to be negatively buoyant and just suspend myself in one place just above the riverbed and excavate. So I'm very comfortable being in that environment. But it's the archaeology side, which for me came afterwards, where I learned about about field work, about how to record these objects, how to handle them, conservation, preservation, etc. So for an archaeologist who's fully qualified now, for them to start searching in the rivers, they have to learn how to scuba dive, and that can take a couple of years to get fully trained, to get all of your kit, and to be in a position where you're comfortable underwater, because actually it is a dangerous environment.
Yes.
Physically challenging, and it's not for everybody, because it can be really dark if you go into deeper water. It's slightly claustrophobic, so everything's against you. I guess I was just very fortunate. I was an experienced scuba diver coming into the world of archaeology, not the other way around.
Yeah. Where do you see the future of underwater archaeology?
Yeah, I guess the future of underwater archaeology is going to be massive. Without a shadow of doubt, and many different forums and people have reached out to me. Basically, seeing shows on TV like River Hunters has opened up people's imaginations to the possibilities. Everyone's got a river in the, not too far away from them, what might be in there. And then the popularity of the TV show Detectorists.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely magic. Everyone wants a metal detector, and so many people are trying to combine the two. The word of caution, I guess, is that you can't just jump into any river. Generally, they are owned by somebody. And the Treasure Trove Act, the law of the land, says you must have those permissions first. Even rivers are generally owned by somebody, so you can't just get a metal detector and go and plodge and search your local river or stream. You need to identify who the landowner is first and get those permissions. That said, they're likely to give it to you, because not many people have searched these rivers. But rivers themselves in England can be quite dangerous places. If they're fast flowing, if they're deep, generally they're freezing cold. And sadly, every year many people lose their lives, typically accidentally in British waterways. So it's not the safest of hobbies. You just need to be very mindful of that. If you eventually in a position where you're going to either metal detect near a river or in a river, you need to let somebody know where you are. You need to ideally have somebody close by. Be very wary of the fact that if you go deeper than your knees, you could be swept off your feet. And the water is so cold. Cold water shock is just a terrible thing that takes your breath away. And sadly, as I said, many people die. So it's not the safest of hobbies. But one that I think is going to be massive. I think a lot of people are going to be investigating our waterways in the years to come.
Well, Gary, thank you very much for joining us. We've thoroughly enjoyed it, and obviously we will post your links, your socials and your future work on ours as well, and wish you all the very best for 2024, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Well, thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you very much.
It's been thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
We'll be back next time with more Tales from the Trowel. Make sure you like, follow and subscribe from wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Tales from the Trowel, an Archaeology News Northeast production in association with Pitmatic Productions.